everyone. Welcome to episode 34 of Takeaways. My name is Patrick Searcy. I'm Director of Marketing for ALN Apartment Data, and I'm joined by the actual star of the show here, Jordan Brooks, our Senior Market Analyst. Jordan, how are you, sir?
I'm great, Patrick. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for asking. So we're talking today about your May 2023 newsletter article. It's called An Update on Rent Growth. So the article mentioned rent growth extending for months beyond the occupancy peak of 2021. Can you give us a little more detail on what that looked like?
Sure. Well, if you look at when national average occupancy actually peaked, it was back in around November of 2021. And then we've seen occupancy kind of be on a steady downward trend since then, with a couple of months in there, sort of in the summer of last year as the exception, where it kind of moved sideways. But essentially, occupancy peaked in November of 21, and the rent growth that was kind of well above the typical sort of long-term average, or the typical norm, didn't really stop until about the August or September timeframe of 2022. So for most of 2022, really the rent growth was continuing apace, despite the fact that occupancies had already peaked months in the past.
Well, one point that you made was how the 12-month absorption numbers in the first half of 22 were kind of blurring the significant shift that had already taken place. So given how much is influx, is that a lesson that we should carry forward looking ahead at this year?
Absolutely, and that's part of the reason I mentioned it in the newsletter, is because we're still in this sort of highly volatile period where there's a lot of variance, and the numbers are moving all around, and so it's important, especially important. It's always important, but it's particularly important in these type of periods, to not get caught up just looking at 12-month trailing numbers or even the quarterly numbers. I mean, really, the monthly data should be a part of the information that you're looking at. And the reason I gave is, if you look back at last year, certainly after the end of the first quarter of 2022, but even into the second quarter, if you were just looking at those 12-month absorption numbers, they still looked really good. And that's because it was picking up the absorption in the back half of 2021 that was included in that 12-month period. But if you were looking at the quarterly numbers, but particularly the monthly numbers, it was clear. I'm literally starting from January of 2022, absorption was lower than we would expect, if, aside from just the general seasonal trend, which that tends to be a quiet period for the industry anyway. But even aside from the seasonal aspect, it was clear that there'd been a major shift in the demand picture. And I remember we put out a newsletter on that in February of 2022. But in April, May, June, if you're looking at those 12-month absorption numbers, which is what a lot of the sort of general articles do, that's a standard metric, the absorption numbers still looked great pretty far into 2022. So that was kind of my point in there. And like I said, for this year in particular, we've seen a little bit of an upswing in the March and then subsequently in the April absorption data. And so again, it's going to be important not to get caught up in, oh wow, the last 9 months or 12 months have looked pretty bad, but we're now seeing in the last month or two a little bit of an upswing, and you're going to miss that in the longer term data.
A major theme in this month's newsletter article was upcoming new supply. And some people are a little chicken little when it comes to the units expected to come online this year, and others kind of think this concern is overblown. Where do you stand looking at that for this year?
Well, this is a really interesting sort of aspect of industry performance this year, because, really since the middle of last decade, we've seen multifamily new supply on a pretty uninterrupted upward trend in terms of just delivered units every year. 2021 and 2022 were very active years. And this year, the volume of new supply that's anticipated to come online, and projections are a little bit all over the place. I think I've seen 475,000, maybe on a little bit of the lower end. And then, we're looking at, over 500,000 is what we're anticipating, at closer to 550,000. So there's going to be a lot of units coming on for sure. And as you said in that question, some of the analysis has been, this is going to be a problem for the industry. Other analysis has been more along the lines of, it's not really going to be something to worry about. I think I fall maybe in the middle. In the near term, for sure, there's going to be some supply pressure on occupancies, and that's going to have an effect on lease concessions and rent growth. Particularly, there's going to be an impact sort of across regions and different from market to market. If you look at the markets where they have the largest share of existing stock, represented by the share of the pipeline that's already broken ground, meaning these are projects that can't be delayed or canceled. Most of the markets at the top of the list, with a couple of exceptions, I think I mentioned in the newsletter, like Boise, Seattle, New York, those are pretty high up the list, but basically all the other markets are in the Sun Belt. And so these are units that are coming into high growth markets, high in migration markets that have consistently grown in population for going on a decade now in a lot of cases. And so these are units that are needed to kind of stabilize what we've seen in terms of rents over the last few years in particular. But in the short term, it is a lot of units that are going to be coming online. And so I think particularly there might be some pain points in specific markets, and maybe the Sun Belt more broadly is going to be more impacted this year than some other parts of the country, like the Great Lakes region, for example, where we don't see the same sort of influx of new supply coming in 2023. But ultimately, I don't think it's going to be some sort of crisis or anything for the industry.
It was right about a month ago that you and I had a chance to actually see each other in person. I got to watch a presentation at the Fort Worth Convention Center at TAA One conference. It was a really great session. I really enjoyed it. I had a great meal with you. It was awesome getting to see you. You've been super busy since, and I know you're still your plate is still full. What do you have coming up?
Yeah, it's still busy, and I'm still having dreams of that meal that we had. That was delicious. So it was great to see you back in sort of on the home turf last month. Coming up, I'll actually be back in the Dallas area May 23rd. I'm going to be speaking at the Resmania conference put on by Resman. So I'll be there in Dallas. I believe the venue's actually in Plano. And then May 31st, I'll be doing a webinar for the Apartment Association of Greater Los Angeles. So if either of those two areas are of interest to our viewers, definitely keep those in mind. The Resman event is actually going to be more of a national purview. So, that should be generally applicable. And then after that, we've got NAA, and I'll be doing a panel discussion, moderating a panel discussion with some fantastic panelists, kind of looking at the difference between the sort of urban suburban outlying divide and how that's kind of shaken out in the sort of post-COVID period and what we can take from all of that. So that should be a great session, and that's going to be on June 7th, I believe.
It's awesome. And that Resmania, that's my hometown. So maybe I'll try and make it over there. That'd be awesome. Well, do keep an eye on our social media for more info on what Jordan's up to, on what our company is up to. We do a lot of trade shows, a lot of events that are happening throughout the country. So you can find out more from there. You can follow us on Twitter at ALN APT Data, or you can just search for ALN Apartment Data on Facebook, LinkedIn, and Instagram. Don't forget that you can click that like and subscribe button. Don't forget to click that bell for notifications on any of our new content that we put out on YouTube. Jordan, thank you so much for today. I appreciate it. It's great talking with you, and we'll see you soon enough.
All right. Thanks, Patrick.